Welcome back. So we're going to think a little bit about moral theories. So we've already talked about morals as being related to how we decide what is good or bad, what is right or wrong, what is true or not true. A moral theory is how we approach this issue. How do we even decide what it means to be good or right or true? We need to be able to wrap our heads around that. That's what a moral theory is about. And so we're not going to get into the details of it, but chapter 4 of our book provides a pretty nice summary of some of the main moral theories out there that are very influential in different ways. And so specifically, we'll talk a little bit about utilitarianism. So again, I don't want to get into too many isms. Utilitarianism is one that's worth grappling with, specifically within economics. It has some really close ties to a lot of the tools that we use for descriptive work within economics. And so it's important to understand what it means in a normative sense. Utilitarianism is the idea that the correct act to do, the good act, is the act that has the most net good for the most people. So if I think about my example from the other day of considering giving some hand sanitizer wipes to a homeless person who might need them more than I do, a utilitarian would say, if that person will get more utility out of them, more usefulness out of them than I would, then yes, the correct thing to do would be to give those hand wipes to that homeless person because they need them more than I do. And if there's a group of homeless people there and this packet would be really useful to some of them and not as useful to others, what we would do is we'd think about what it would kind of cost me, what I'd be giving up by handing them over, and how much they would gain by getting them. And we would add up the losses and the gains for everyone involved. And the act that leads to the biggest number of net gains, so gains minus losses, is the correct thing. That's the utilitarian perspective. It's very influential within economics because it's amenable to a lot of the mathematical tools that we use for descriptive work. So almost implicitly, a lot of times in economics, we ascribe to a utilitarian perspective on a lot of things. So for example, I do research in environmental economics. And one of the most powerful tools we have is cost-benefit analysis. There's a proposed regulation to reduce the amount of mercury pollution coming out of power plants. How do we decide what the proper level of regulation is? If we put the requirement at 0 mercury coming out the smokestacks, it means we need to basically get rid of half of our power plants. And electricity will get really, really expensive because we'll have to be building a whole bunch of new facilities, nuclear and renewables. And a lot of people who don't have a lot of extra money are going to be basically priced out of being able to buy electricity, which is an essential good for a lot of purposes, right? And so having the pollution level, the regulation level at 0 is probably not the right answer. 0 pollution sounds nice in theory, but when it comes to the real world and the trade-offs involved, a 0 level of pollution for most things in most places is probably not the right answer because it costs so much to get to 0 pollution. We have to give up so much that we enjoy and get a lot out of. It's probably not the right answer. So we could instead look at, instead of 0 mercury, we could look at 1 part per million, 2 parts per million, 10 parts per million, 100 parts per million. We can look at a lot of different levels, right? And for each of those, we can come up with what it would cost us to reduce to that level of pollution, and we can think about what the benefits of that reduction would be. So that's a cost-benefit analysis we use all the time in environmental economics. In fact, we use it for all major regulatory actions about changing our environmental laws. What we're implicitly doing there, depending on how we use that cost-benefit analysis result, if we are saying this standard of 5 parts per million of mercury has the greatest net benefit, then we're implicitly ascribing to a utilitarian framework, because we're saying that this is the action that will have the most net good for the most people. And what we're doing is we're basically weighting everyone equally. So we're factoring in that each of those homeless persons is getting a gain from the additional hand sanitizer wipes, and I have a loss from giving away the packet of hand sanitizer wipes, but a gain to one of them is exactly the same as a gain to me or a loss to me if we're talking about magnitudes. And it doesn't matter who is who, we're just looking at everyone and adding them all up together, which implicitly means we're weighting everyone equally and we're being utilitarian. So it's important to understand what's going on in the background if we're using something like cost-benefit analysis for that purpose, to say this is the best thing for us to do. A normative claim based on a descriptive tool and exercise is often implicitly ascribing to a utilitarian framework. Some contrast to utilitarian framework are things like a natural law theory, that there's kind of a natural ordering of things, and to go along with that natural ordering is good, and to go against it is bad. And so why is it bad to murder? Because species aren't supposed to kill each other, they're supposed to promote within their species, so murdering is bad. That would be kind of the foundation, the moral theory for a lot of people. Again, if you look at environmental things, a lot of people would say pollution is bad because it's harming the environment and the natural condition of our environment. If it's bad because it's not natural, that's ascribing to a natural law sort of moral theory. Very closely tied to that is a kind of divine order sort of theory. And that is, instead of just saying there's a natural ordering, you would say that there is a creator who made things a certain way, and to go along with that is good, and to go against that is bad. And we can look at what that creator has said is good and bad, and that guides us, and that is basically the theory that we use to determine what's good and what's bad. So again, that's a contrast with a utilitarian framework where we say what's good or bad depends on the result and what gives us the most good for the most people. Maybe we would say that what's good is what is natural. Maybe we'd say what is good is what God has said we should do. Those are all different moral theories for wrapping our head around questions like, what does it even mean to be good or true? And we need that if we're going to come up with the right questions, right? So a lot of times we don't take this step back and think about the moral theory for how we addressed the basic questions themselves and what we mean when we're trying to ask them. When we don't step back and evaluate it, what we're implicitly doing, and this is true for ethics in general, if we don't step back and think about it, we're giving up a little bit of our own freedom, a little bit of our own autonomy. Why is that? Well, we all have this sense of morality, these ethics. You can think of them as almost being built in, right? So we were born with some, our families, our communities, our churches, our schools, our culture with television and media, all of those things have kind of built up in us this idea, this sense of right and wrong, our sense of morality. That's a big part of making you, right? And so we're not trying to take that away. That's really important. That's what you bring, and that is what you should bring to discussions about morality. But what we are trying to do is take a step back and evaluate what it means to be good, in a way that if we don't reflect on that, then implicitly what we do is we're just going along with whatever we've been encoded with, right? And so we actually have this additional sense of freedom by thinking about it with a broader perspective, asking some of these deeper questions. That allows us to evaluate some of the things that we've encoded. And we can choose to run with it, and that's great. We can choose to keep some of it and maybe jettison some that doesn't seem to fit us as well when we think about what theory wants to really drive how we think about morality. So that's something that we're able to do only if we ask these big questions. And again, we could spend a whole course talking about these big questions. It would be in a philosophy course, not an economics course. For our purposes, we want to be aware that there are these big theories out there for coming up with answers to the questions like, whoa, what does it even mean to be good or right or true? And it's important to have familiarity with something like utilitarianism, with something like natural law theory, with something like divine order theory. And so those are the big ones that we'll kind of reference. And I want you guys to start thinking about, when you have an argument that you're putting together, what parts of it are making sense within a certain moral theory. Because a lot of times we can do that. We can say, well, this is very much a utilitarian sort of argument, or this is very much a divine order sort of argument. And often we have elements of both in a lot of our arguments, but we're going to start kind of looking for those as we make them. So this wraps it up for our week 1 lecture material. So I hope you've enjoyed getting to know our book a little bit. Again, we'll start moving more and more off script from it as we focus more on questions of direct economics, unemployment rates, inequality, socialism, things that have strong moral dimensions that are based within our economy. Thank you.